The Thompson family's uneasy new life in a small town takes an unexpected turn when James, a man they distrust without cause, saves them from a perilous accident. As they grapple with gratitude and guilt, tensions rise. Will they allow old prejudices to dictate their future? Or will they embrace change before it's too late? Before we get started, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more exciting content, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's dive in. James Anderson was a man who believed in the simple joys of life. Despite his substantial success as an entrepreneur, he preferred the routine tasks that kept him grounded, like doing his own grocery shopping. On this particular evening, the sun cast a golden hue over the quiet town as James parked his car in the nearly empty supermarket lot. He enjoyed shopping at this hour. The aisles were less crowded, and he could take his time selecting the freshest ingredients for his meals. As he walked through the automatic doors, the cool air of the store greeted him. He grabbed a shopping basket and began his usual route, starting with the produce section. James had a keen eye for quality. He gently squeezed tomatoes, inspected the leaves of lettuce for wilting, and held fruits up to the light as if examining precious gems. Meanwhile, not too far away, another family was navigating the same aisles. The Thompsons were new to town. A father, Richard, a mother, Susan, and their teenage son, Michael. They had moved from a bustling city to this quieter area, hoping for a change of pace. However, old habits and ingrained biases had followed them. Richard, a stern-looking man with a furrowed brow, pushed the cart while Susan picked items off the shelves. Michael trailed behind, earbuds in, barely acknowledging his surroundings. As James reached for a bunch of ripe bananas, he noticed the family entering the aisle. He offered a friendly nod, a habitual gesture of courtesy. Susan glanced at him briefly but quickly looked away. Richard tightened his grip on the cart handle, and Michael remained absorbed in his music. Undeterred, James continued his shopping. He moved to the bakery section, enticed by the aroma of freshly baked bread. As he deliberated between a loaf of sourdough and a baguette, the Thompson family appeared beside him once more. This time, the proximity was unavoidable. The bakery display was narrow, and both parties stood within a few feet of each other. "Excuse me," James said politely, stepping aside to give them room. Richard gave a curt nod but said nothing. Susan pretended to be engrossed in the selection of pastries, and Michael tapped away on his phone. An awkward silence hung in the air. Sensing the discomfort, James decided to move on. He headed toward the dairy section, checking his mental list. Milk, eggs, cheese. As he opened the door to grab a carton of milk, he heard hushed voices behind him. "Did you see how he looked at us?" Susan whispered. "Just ignore it," Richard replied quietly. "Let's finish up and go." James couldn't help but feel a pang of hurt. He hadn't meant to cause any discomfort. Shaking off the feeling, he proceeded to the next aisle. Perhaps they were just having a rough day, he thought. In the cereal aisle, fate brought them together once more. Both reached for the same box of whole-grain oats simultaneously. Their hands almost touched before they both pulled back. "Go ahead," James offered with a smile. Richard hesitated before grabbing the box. "Thanks," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. At that moment, Michael looked up from his phone, his eyes meeting James's for the first time. There was a fleeting moment of connection, quickly broken when Michael turned away. Feeling the growing tension, James decided it might be best to wrap up his shopping. He headed toward the checkout lanes, placing his items on the conveyor belt. As he waited, he noticed the family behind him in line. He considered striking up a conversation to ease the awkwardness, but thought better of it. The cashier, a young woman with a friendly demeanor, scanned his items. "Did you find everything you needed tonight?" she asked. "Yes, thank you," James replied warmly. He paid for his groceries and packed them into reusable bags. As he was about to leave, he heard a commotion near the entrance. A small child had dropped a jar of sauce, and it shattered across the floor. Employees hurried to clean up the mess. James took a moment to assess the situation. The Thompson family was still at the checkout, and the path to the exit was partially blocked by the cleanup efforts. Deciding to wait, he stepped aside near a display of seasonal items. "Can we go now?" Michael sighed, clearly impatient. "Just a minute," Susan responded, her tone strained. As the family gathered their bags, Richard glanced in James's direction. Their eyes met briefly before Richard looked away. James felt a mix of emotions, sadness, frustration, but also a deep understanding that prejudice often stemmed from ignorance rather than malice. He recalled his own experiences growing up, the lessons his parents had taught him about kindness and empathy. They had always emphasized the importance of treating others with respect, regardless of how he was treated in return. It was a principle he lived by, even when faced with discomfort. The cleanup at the entrance was nearly complete. James adjusted the bags in his hands, preparing to leave. As he walked toward the doors, he noticed the family had stopped just ahead, seemingly waiting for the same opportunity to exit. "After you," he said, gesturing for them to go first. Richard gave a tight-lipped smile. "It's fine, you can go." James nodded and proceeded through the doors. The evening air was crisp, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees lining the parking lot. He made his way to his car, parked a few rows away. Behind him, the Thompson family exited the store. They headed toward their vehicle, parked not too far from James's. As he unlocked his car and loaded the groceries into the trunk, he couldn't shake the feeling that tonight's encounter was more than just an awkward series of coincidences. He glanced over and saw Michael struggling with a heavy bag. Without overthinking, James walked over. "Need a hand with that?" he offered kindly. Michael looked surprised. No, I'm okay," he stammered. "Are you sure?" James asked, noticing the bag looked ready to tear. Before Michael could respond, Richard intervened. "We've got it covered," he said firmly, stepping between James and his son. "Of course," James replied, taking a step back. "Have a good evening." He returned to his car, feeling the weight of the unspoken tensions. As he got into the driver's seat, he took a deep breath, hoping that perhaps time and experience would soften their perceptions. Starting the engine, James drove out of the parking lot, the glow of the supermarket lights fading in his rearview mirror. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a series of events that would intertwine their lives in unexpected ways. The following morning, the sun peeked through the curtains of the Thompson household, casting a warm glow over the modest living room. Richard sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of black coffee while skimming through the local newspaper. Susan bustled around the kitchen preparing breakfast. The aroma of freshly cooked eggs and toast filled the air, but there was a palpable tension between them. "Did you sleep well?" Susan asked cautiously, breaking the silence. Richard sighed, folding the newspaper. "As well as one can in a new place," he replied, still getting used to the quiet. Michael descended the stairs, earbuds already in place. He grabbed a piece of toast from the table and mumbled a half-hearted "morning" before heading toward the door. "Hold on," Richard called out. "Where are you going?" "Just out," Michael replied without turning around. "Out where?" his father pressed. "Just exploring the neighborhood," Michael said, finally meeting his father's gaze. Richard studied his son for a moment before nodding. "Be back by dinner." Michael nodded and slipped out the door. Susan watched him leave, concern etched on her face. "He's been distant lately," she remarked. "New town, new school soon. It's a lot for him," Richard said, though his tone lacked empathy. Meanwhile, James was enjoying a leisurely morning at his home on the other side of town. His house was a reflection of his character, unpretentious yet welcoming. He sat on his porch with a cup of tea, watching the world wake up. The events of the previous night lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling from his encounters with the Thompson family. Deciding not to dwell on it, James headed inside to get ready for the day. He had a meeting with a local charity organization he supported. Community involvement was important to him, and he looked forward to contributing wherever he could. Back in town, Michael wandered aimlessly, the music from his earbuds providing a soundtrack to his thoughts. He found himself at a local park, where children played and couples strolled leisurely. Taking a seat on a bench, he gazed at the pond in the center, its surface reflecting the clear blue sky. "Mind if I sit here?" a voice interrupted his thoughts. Michael looked up to see a girl about his age, smiling politely. She had a sketchbook tucked under her arm. Sure," he replied, scooting over. "Thanks," she said, taking a seat. She opened her sketchbook and began to draw, occasionally glancing up at the scenery. Curiosity got the better of him. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She turned the sketchbook toward him, revealing a detailed pencil drawing of the pond and surrounding trees. "Just capturing the moment," she said. "That's really good," Michael admitted. "Thanks. I'm Emma, by the way." "Michael? Are you new around here? I haven't seen you before," she inquired. "Yeah, we just moved in a few days ago." "Welcome to town," Emma said warmly. "It's a quiet place, but it has its charm." Michael felt at ease for the first time since moving. They chatted for a while, sharing stories about their interests and aspirations. As the afternoon wore on, Michael realized he should head back home. "I should get going," he said, standing up. "It was nice meeting you," Emma replied. "Maybe I'll see you around?" "Yeah, maybe," he said with a small smile. As he walked back, his thoughts drifted to the friendly encounter. It was a stark contrast to the tension he felt at home. Perhaps this town wouldn't be so bad after all. At the Thompson residence, Susan was tidying up when she noticed Richard pacing the living room. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "I've been thinking," he began. "About last night at the store." Susan tensed, recalling the uncomfortable interactions. "What about it?" "I just don't like the way things are changing around here," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "We're outsiders in our own community now." "Maybe we're the ones who need to change," Susan suggested gently. "Holding on to old prejudices isn't helping anyone." Richard frowned. "It's not prejudice. It's about preserving our way of life." Susan sighed, choosing her words carefully. "Richard, we moved here for a fresh start. Maybe it's time we let go of the past." He didn't respond, his expression unreadable. The conversation hung heavily in the air, unresolved. Later that day, James arrived at the community center for his meeting. He was greeted by Maria, the coordinator. "James, so good to see you," she exclaimed. "Always a pleasure, Maria," he replied warmly. They discussed upcoming events, including a neighborhood outreach program aimed at fostering inclusivity and understanding among residents. "It's more important than ever," Maria emphasized. "We've had some newcomers, and there's been a bit of friction." James nodded thoughtfully. "Count me in. Let me know how I can help." As the meeting concluded, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. He believed in the power of community to bridge divides, and he was eager to contribute. Meanwhile, Michael returned home to find his parents still in a subdued mood. He decided to share his positive experience. "I met someone today," he announced during dinner. "That's great," Susan said with a hint of enthusiasm. "Who did you meet?" "A girl named Emma. She's an artist. We talked for a while at the park." "Glad to hear you're making friends," Richard said, though his tone was distant. Michael hesitated before speaking again. "She mentioned there's a community event coming up. Thought maybe we could all go." Richard looked up sharply. "I don't think that's necessary." "Why not?" Michael challenged gently. "Because we don't need to get involved in every little thing," Richard replied. Susan intervened softly. "It might be good for us, Richard, a chance to meet our neighbors." He pushed his plate away. "We'll see," he said curtly, standing up from the table. Michael exchanged a glance with his mother, who offered a sympathetic smile. The rest of the evening passed in uneasy silence. The next day, James decided to visit the park to put up flyers for the upcoming community event. As he stapled a flyer to a bulletin board, he noticed Michael sitting alone on a nearby bench. "Hello again," James said, approaching cautiously. Michael looked up, surprise registering on his face. "Oh, hi, mind if I join you?" James asked. Michael shrugged. "Sure." James sat down, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Yeah, I guess," Michael replied. They sat in silence for a moment before James spoke again. "I think we got off on the wrong foot the other night." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "My dad can be difficult. Parents can be complicated," James agreed, "but they usually mean well." Michael sighed. "I don't know about that." James decided to change the subject. "So are you new to town?" "Yeah, just moved here. Still getting used to everything." "It can be tough adjusting to a new place," James said empathetically. "If you ever need anything, feel free to reach out." Michael glanced at him, skepticism in his eyes. "Why are you being nice to me?" James smiled softly. "Because it's important to be kind. You never know what someone else is going through." Michael considered this. "I met someone else nice yesterday, Emma." "Ah, Emma's great. Talented artist. She's been involved in a lot of community projects. She told me about an event coming up." Yes, the neighborhood outreach. You should come. It's a good way to meet people. I'll think about it, Michael said, his tone less guarded. James stood up. Well, I should get back to putting up these flyers. It was good talking to you, Michael. Yeah, you too, Michael replied. As James walked away, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps reaching out was making a difference. That evening, Michael broached the subject again at dinner. I talked to that man from the store today. Richard looked up sharply. Who? The one from the supermarket. His name is James. Richard's expression hardened. I don't want you talking to strangers. He's not a stranger anymore, Michael argued. He's involved in the community. He invited us to the event. I said we'll see, Richard replied tersely. Why are you so against it? Michael pressed. Enough, Richard said firmly. I make the decisions in this family. Susan placed a calming hand on Michael's arm. Let's not argue, we'll discuss it later. Michael pushed back his chair and left the table, frustration evident in his movements. Susan turned to Richard. You're pushing him away. I'm protecting him, Richard insisted. From what? Kind people? New experiences? Susan shook her head. We're not in the city anymore. Things are different here. Exactly, Richard said, and we need to be cautious. Susan sighed deeply. Living in fear isn't living at all. Richard didn't respond, his gaze fixed on a spot on the table. Upstairs, Michael sat by his window looking out at the quiet street. He felt a mix of anger and sadness. His father's resistance to change was suffocating. For the first time since moving, he had started to feel a connection to this place, and he didn't want that to slip away. Determined, he picked up his phone and sent a message to Emma, asking for more details about the community event. If his parents wouldn't join him, he'd go on his own. Across town, James was finishing up his day. As he prepared for bed, he reflected on his conversation with Michael. He hoped that small gestures could lead to bigger changes. He believed in the goodness of people, even when it was buried beneath layers of fear and prejudice. Little did any of them know, circumstances were aligning that would soon bring their lives closer than ever, testing their beliefs and challenging them to confront the barriers between them. The following weekend arrived with an unexpected chill in the air, hinting at the approaching autumn. James decided to revisit the supermarket to pick up supplies for the community outreach event he was organizing. As he entered the store, he noticed it was busier than usual. Families filled the aisles, and the sound of chatter mixed with the hum of shopping carts created a lively atmosphere. Meanwhile, the Thompson family had also ventured out for their weekly shopping. Richard pushed the cart with a stern expression. Susan checked items off their list, and Michael trailed behind, earbuds in place but music turned off, lost in his thoughts. As fate would have it, James and the Thompsons found themselves in the same aisle once again. This time, it was the canned goods section. James reached for a can on the top shelf, unaware that on the other side, Richard was doing the same. Their hands almost collided, causing both men to pull back abruptly. Sorry about that, James said politely. Richard gave a curt nod, avoiding eye contact. No problem. Susan glanced between them, sensing the tension but saying nothing. Michael observed the exchange, his eyes lingering on James before turning away. Deciding to avoid further awkwardness, James moved to the next aisle. As he did, he heard a commotion near the front of the store. A child's cry echoed, followed by raised voices. Curiosity piqued, he headed toward the sound. Near the store entrance, a display of large stacked boxes had become unstable. The base supporting the display was giving way, causing the entire structure to wobble precariously. Shoppers nearby began to notice, some stepping back in alarm. Unbeknownst to them, the Thompson family was directly in the potential path of the falling display. Susan was examining a shelf of spices, Richard was preoccupied with his phone, and Michael had stepped away to look at a promotional stand. James quickly assessed the situation. The display was teetering, and it was only a matter of seconds before it would collapse. Without hesitation, he sprang into action. "Watch out," he shouted, sprinting toward the Thompsons. Susan looked up, confused by the sudden warning. James reached her just as the display began to topple. He guided her swiftly out of the way, his arm shielding her from any debris. Simultaneously, he called out to Richard. "Move aside." Richard looked up, startled. Seeing the falling boxes, he froze momentarily. James lunged forward, grasping Richard's arm and pulling him to safety. The display crashed down, sending products scattering across the floor. A moment of stunned silence followed. Shoppers and employees gathered, murmuring in concern. The store manager rushed over, his face pale. "Is everyone okay?" he asked anxiously. Susan, her heart pounding, turned to James. I think so," she stammered. You saved us." Richard shook off his surprise, his eyes meeting James's for the first time without the usual guardedness. "I didn't even see it coming," he admitted. James gave a reassuring smile. "I'm glad you're both unharmed." Michael hurried over, having witnessed the scene from a distance. "What happened?" he asked breathlessly. "There was an accident with the display," Susan explained, still shaken. "But James here made sure we were safe." Michael looked at James with a mix of awe and gratitude. "Thank you," he said earnestly. Employees began clearing the fallen items, and the manager apologized profusely. "We're so sorry for this incident," he said. "Please, if there's anything we can do." "It's all right," James assured him. "These things happen. The important thing is that no one was hurt." Richard took a deep breath, extending his hand to James. "I owe you a debt of gratitude," he said sincerely, "and an apology for how I've acted." James accepted the handshake warmly. "No need for that. I'm just glad everyone's okay." An awkward but hopeful silence settled between them. Susan broke it by offering a tentative smile. "Perhaps we could all sit down and talk sometime," she suggested. "Get to know each other properly." James nodded. "I'd like that." They exchanged contact information, and as they parted ways, there was a sense that something significant had shifted. That evening, back at the Thompson home, the family gathered in the living room. The usual barriers seemed to have lowered, and a genuine conversation unfolded. "I can't believe how close that was," Susan said, her voice still tinged with disbelief. "James acted without hesitation," Michael added. "He didn't think twice about helping us." Richard leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I've been wrong about a lot of things," he confessed. "Holding on to old prejudices, letting them cloud my judgment." Susan reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "It's not too late to change," she said gently. Michael looked between his parents. "Maybe attending that community event isn't such a bad idea after all." Richard considered this. "You're right. It's time we became part of this community instead of isolating ourselves." The decision made, they felt a collective sense of relief. Across town, James sat on his porch, reflecting on the day's events. He was hopeful that this could be the start of a new understanding between him and the Thompson family. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from Richard, expressing gratitude once more and confirming their plans to meet. Over the next few days, James and the Thompsons met for coffee at a local cafe. The atmosphere was relaxed, conversations flowing more easily than any of them had anticipated. Richard shared stories about his previous work and the challenges of moving to a new town. Susan talked about her interests in gardening and cooking. Michael opened up about his aspirations in music and art, surprising his parents with his willingness to share. James listened attentively, offering his own experiences and insights. He spoke about his involvement in community projects and his belief in the power of connecting with others. "I have to admit," Richard said at one point, "I was skeptical about moving here, but meeting you has changed my perspective." James smiled. "Change isn't always easy, but it's often worthwhile." As they left the cafe, they felt lighter, the weight of past misunderstandings lifted. The day of the community event arrived, bringing with it clear skies and a festive atmosphere. Colorful banners adorned the town square, booths were set up showcasing local crafts, and the scent of freshly baked goods filled the air. The Thompsons arrived together, greeted warmly by neighbors and fellow attendees. Michael spotted Emma and introduced her to his parents. "So you're the artist Michael's been telling us about," Susan said warmly. Emma blushed slightly, guilty as charged. "Your work is impressive," Richard added, genuinely appreciating the displayed pieces. James approached them, his face brightening. "Glad you all could make it." "We wouldn't miss it," Richard replied, shaking his hand. Throughout the event, the family engaged with the community, participating in activities and making new friends. Susan volunteered at a charity bake sale, Richard joined a discussion on local initiatives, and Michael performed an impromptu guitar piece with other young musicians. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the gathering. The sense of community was palpable. Later that evening, the Thompsons invited James over for dinner. The meal was filled with laughter and shared stories. They spoke openly about their past, acknowledging mistakes and expressing a desire to move forward positively. "I've realized that holding on to fear only holds us back," Richard said thoughtfully. "Meeting you, James, has shown me that there's so much more to gain by opening up." James raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he toasted. "To new beginnings," they echoed, clinking their glasses. The evening continued with light-hearted conversation and plans for future gatherings. The barriers that once existed had been replaced with genuine friendship. As James walked home under the starlit sky, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had not been without its challenges, but the outcome reaffirmed his belief in the goodness that could emerge when people chose understanding over prejudice. Back at the Thompson home, the family settled into a comfortable silence. Michael strummed his guitar softly, Susan sipped tea, and Richard gazed thoughtfully into the distance. "This feels right," Susan said softly. Richard nodded. "It does. I'm grateful for where we are now." Michael smiled, continuing to play a gentle melody. The harmony within their home mirrored the harmony they had found within themselves and their community. The events of the past weeks had brought unexpected changes, but they embraced them wholeheartedly. They looked forward to the future with hope, knowing that they had taken meaningful steps toward building genuine connections and leaving behind the shadows of their past. In the days following the festival, the Thompson family settled into a rhythm that felt both new and comfortably familiar. The air in their home was lighter, conversations flowed more freely, and laughter echoed in rooms that had long been silent. Richard, once reserved and wary, found himself embracing the community with an openness he hadn't known he possessed. One crisp morning, as the first hints of autumn painted the leaves in shades of amber and crimson, Richard and James met at a local cafe for breakfast. The establishment was a cozy nook beloved by the townspeople, its walls adorned with local art and shelves lined with books available for patrons to peruse. "Good to see you, Richard." James greeted him with a firm handshake and a warm smile. "Likewise, James," Richard replied, feeling genuine enthusiasm. They ordered their meals and settled into a window seat overlooking the bustling street. Richard watched as people passed by, some walking their dogs, others carrying groceries, all exuding a sense of belonging that he now shared. "I wanted to thank you again for your help with the youth initiative," Richard began. "Michael is over the moon about how it's turning out." James sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "He's a talented young man with a lot of passion. It's wonderful to see him channeling that into something positive." Richard nodded. "You know, I've been thinking a lot lately about how much has changed since we moved here. How much I've changed." James regarded him kindly. "Change can be difficult, but it's often where we find the most growth." Richard took a deep breath. "I need to be honest with you, James. When we first met, I wasn't very accepting. I let my own fears and biases cloud my judgment." James remained silent, allowing Richard the space to continue. "I've realized that those prejudices were unfounded and unfair, not just to you, but to my family and myself," Richard confessed. "I want to apologize for how I acted." James reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Richard's arm. "Apology accepted, my friend. It takes courage to acknowledge our mistakes." A weight seemed to lift from Richard's shoulders. "Thank you for your understanding. You've shown me nothing but kindness, even when I didn't deserve it." "We all have our journeys," James said gently. "What's important is where we choose to go from here." Their conversation shifted to lighter topics, the upcoming community projects, local sports, and favorite books. By the time they parted ways, both men felt their friendship deepen. Meanwhile, Susan was busy preparing for another gathering of the gardening club at their home. She meticulously arranged an assortment of teas and pastries in the sunroom, which overlooked her flourishing garden. As the club members arrived, the room filled with lively chatter. Maria, the community coordinator, approached Susan with a pamphlet in hand. "Susan, I wanted to share this with you," she said. "It's about a community wellness program we're starting. Given your interest in gardening and natural remedies, I thought you might want to be involved." Susan scanned the pamphlet, her eyes lighting up. "This sounds fantastic. I'd love to participate." "Wonderful," Maria replied. "Your energy and ideas would be a great asset." The group spent the afternoon exchanging tips on seasonal planting, sharing personal stories, and strengthening the bonds of friendship. Susan felt a profound sense of contentment. She had not only found a community, but also rediscovered parts of herself that had been dormant. Later that day, Michael and Emma met at the community center to plan the next event for their youth initiative. They sat surrounded by posters, instruments, and art supplies, the room abuzz with creative energy. "I was thinking we could host an open mic night," Emma suggested. "Give everyone a chance to showcase their talents." Michael grinned. "That's a great idea. We could also include a gallery walk for the visual artists." "Perfect," Emma agreed. "Let's set a date and start spreading the word." As they worked, James stopped by to check on their progress. "How are the preparations going?" he asked. "Really well," Michael replied. "We're excited about the possibilities." "Let me know if you need any help," James offered. "I'm happy to support however I can." "Actually," Emma said thoughtfully, "we were hoping you might speak at the event, share some of your experiences with community building." James smiled. "I'd be honored." The day of the open mic night arrived, and the community center buzzed with anticipation. The space had been transformed with string lights, colorful decorations, and an impressive array of artwork lining the walls. Michael stepped onto the small stage, adjusting the microphone. "Welcome, everyone," he began. "We're thrilled to have you here to celebrate the talents and voices of our community's youth." The evening unfolded beautifully. Performances ranged from heartfelt songs and poetry readings to energetic dance routines and stand-up comedy. The audience responded with enthusiasm, their applause and cheers creating an atmosphere of encouragement and joy. When it was James's turn to speak, he approached the stage with a calm confidence. "Good evening," he began. "I've had the privilege of watching this community grow and thrive, thanks in large part to the efforts of young people like Michael and Emma." He shared stories of his own journey, the challenges he'd faced, and the lessons he'd learned about the importance of empathy and understanding. "It's through connection and shared experiences that we break down the barriers between us," he concluded. "I see a bright future here, one that we're all building together." The crowd erupted in applause, many visibly moved by his words. After the event, as people mingled and congratulated the performers, Richard approached James. "Your speech was inspiring," he said earnestly. "Thank you, Richard," James replied. "It means a lot coming from you." Susan joined them, her eyes shining. "I think tonight was a turning point for so many people." Michael and Emma came over, their excitement palpable. "We couldn't have done it without everyone's support," Michael said. Emma nodded. "This is just the beginning." As the night wound down, the Thompson family and James lingered outside the community center, reluctant to part ways. "Walk with us for a bit?" Richard suggested to James. "Gladly," he agreed. They strolled through the quiet streets, the cool night air filled with the scent of blooming jasmine. The conversation flowed easily, touching on memories of the evening and hopes for the future. "I've been thinking about something," Richard said thoughtfully. "I want to propose a new project, something that brings together different generations in our community. There's so much we can learn from one another." James's eyes lit up. "That's a fantastic idea. Bridging generational gaps can strengthen our community even further." "Count me in," Susan added. "Perhaps we can incorporate elements like storytelling or shared hobbies." Michael chimed in. "And we can involve the youth initiative. There's a lot of interest in connecting with mentors." They spent the rest of the walk brainstorming, the synergy between them evident. Over the next few weeks, the multi-generational project took shape. They organized a series of workshops and events where elders shared their skills and stories with younger participants. Activities ranged from cooking traditional recipes and teaching craftsmanship to discussing historical events and their impact on the present day. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Participants expressed gratitude for the opportunity to connect, learn, and build relationships that transcended age and background. One afternoon, during a storytelling session, an elderly gentleman named Harold shared his experiences from decades past. As he spoke, Michael listened intently, struck by the parallels between Harold's challenges and those faced by his own generation. Afterward, Michael approached him. "Thank you for sharing your story," he said. "It was incredibly insightful." Harold smiled warmly. "It's my pleasure, son. It's important for us to understand each other." The success of the project reinforced the Thompson family's commitment to fostering unity. Richard, in particular, felt a profound sense of purpose. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, he shared his reflections. "I've spent much of my life focused on differences, things that set us apart. But now I see the beauty in our shared humanity." Susan reached for his hand across the table. "I'm so proud of how far we've come." "Me too," Michael agreed. "It's inspiring to see the impact we're making." Richard looked at his family, his heart full. "I couldn't have done this without you all." They raised their glasses in a silent toast, the unspoken understanding passing between them. As time went on, the Thompson family and James continued to contribute meaningfully to the community. Their efforts led to tangible improvements, revitalized public spaces, increased civic engagement, and a stronger sense of solidarity among residents. One day, as Richard and James walked through a newly renovated park, they paused to admire a mural painted by local artists, including Emma and Michael. The artwork depicted scenes of unity, diversity, and hope. "Look at what we've accomplished together," Richard said quietly. "It's remarkable," James agreed. "A testament to what can happen when people come together." Richard turned to James, his expression earnest. "You've been a true friend, James. I can't thank you enough for opening my eyes and helping me become a better man." James placed a hand on his shoulder. "Friendship goes both ways, Richard. You've taught me as much as I've taught you." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as children played nearby and families enjoyed the vibrant space. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Richard mused. "Sometimes," James admitted, "but I believe everything happens for a reason. Our paths crossed when they needed to." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "I'm grateful they did." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, they headed home. The town, once unfamiliar and daunting to the Thompsons, had become a place of belonging and joy. At home, Susan and Michael were preparing dinner, the aroma of spices filling the air. They greeted Richard and James warmly as they entered. "Just in time," Susan announced. "Dinner is almost ready." They gathered around the table, joined by Emma and a few other friends who had become like family. The evening was filled with laughter, stories, and the comfortable camaraderie that comes from genuine connection. Looking around the table, Richard felt a surge of contentment. The journey from isolation and prejudice to acceptance and community had transformed not only his own life, but also the lives of those around him. He raised his glass, drawing everyone's attention. "I want to make a toast," he began, "to friendship, to growth, and to the incredible people who have enriched our lives." "Here, here," they responded, clinking glasses. As the night unfolded, they celebrated not just an evening together, but the realization of how far they had come. The challenges they had faced made their triumphs all the more meaningful. The Thompson family had learned that understanding and compassion could overcome fear and prejudice. They embraced the idea that, while they couldn't change the past, they could shape a better future, one built on kindness, respect, and shared humanity. And so, surrounded by newfound friends and strengthened by the bonds they had forged, they looked forward to the days ahead with hope and joy, knowing that together they could face whatever came next. The first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains of the Thompson household, casting a gentle glow over the rooms that had witnessed so much transformation. Susan woke early, the soft light stirring her from a restful sleep. She lay there for a moment, reflecting on how different life felt now. The tension that once gripped their home had given way to a sense of peace and possibility. Downstairs, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee beckoned. Richard was already in the kitchen, humming a tune as he prepared breakfast, a newfound hobby he had taken up with enthusiasm. He glanced up as Susan entered, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Good morning," he greeted her. "I thought I'd surprise you with your favorite omelet." Susan's eyes lit up. "You spoil me," she replied, embracing him. "But I won't complain." They sat together, enjoying the meal and each other's company. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. "I've been thinking," Richard began, his tone contemplative, "about everything that's happened, the changes we've made." Susan reached across the table, taking his hand. "It's been quite a journey," she agreed. "I want to keep moving forward," he continued, "to make sure we're living the kind of life we can be proud of." She squeezed his hand gently. "We are, Richard, and we're doing it together." Just then, Michael bounded down the stairs, his energy filling the room. "Morning," he called out cheerfully. "You're in a good mood," Richard observed. Michael grinned. "I have some exciting news. Emma and I have been invited to present our project at a regional conference. It's a big opportunity." "That's fantastic," Susan exclaimed. "We're so proud of you." "Absolutely," Richard agreed. "When is it?" "Next month," Michael replied. "We have a lot of preparation to do, but we're up for the challenge." "Let us know how we can help," Susan offered. Michael nodded appreciatively. "Thanks, Mom. Actually, we were hoping to get some community feedback before then. Maybe we could host a small gathering?" "That's a great idea," Richard said. "Let's make it happen." As the day unfolded, the family busied themselves with plans for the gathering. They reached out to neighbors, friends, and community members, inviting them to an evening of presentations, discussions, and fellowship. James was among the first to respond. "Count me in," he said when Michael called. "I'd be happy to provide feedback and support." The following weeks were a flurry of activity. Michael and Emma fine-tuned their presentation, incorporating multimedia elements and interactive components to engage their audience. Susan and Richard coordinated logistics, ensuring that the event would run smoothly. On the evening of the gathering, their home buzzed with anticipation. The living room had been transformed into a makeshift auditorium, complete with a projector and seating arrangements. The scent of homemade appetizers wafted through the air, adding to the welcoming atmosphere. Guests began to arrive, greeted warmly by the Thompsons. Among them were familiar faces: Maria from the community center, Harold the storyteller, and several members of the gardening club. The room filled with conversations and laughter, a testament to the connections they had forged. As everyone settled in, Michael stepped forward to address the group. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady. "Emma and I are excited to share our project with you. Your feedback means a lot to us." They launched into their presentation, showcasing their initiative aimed at fostering creative expression among youth while bridging gaps within the community. Through a series of workshops, events, and collaborative projects, they had engaged dozens of young people, empowering them to find their voices and contribute positively. The audience listened attentively, occasionally nodding in agreement or murmuring appreciation. When they concluded, the room erupted in applause. "Excellent work," James said, standing up to address them. "You've identified a real need and developed an effective approach. I especially appreciate how you've incorporated mentorship elements." Harold chimed in. "As someone who's benefited from these interactions, I can attest to the value you're bringing." Others offered constructive feedback and suggestions, all delivered with encouragement and respect. Michael and Emma took notes, their faces reflecting both gratitude and determination. After the formalities, the gathering transitioned into a social affair. Guests mingled, discussing not only the presentation but also their own experiences and aspirations. The Thompsons moved through the crowd, engaging with their guests and deepening their relationships. At one point, Susan found herself speaking with Maria. "It's remarkable how much has changed since we first moved here," she mused. Maria smiled warmly. "You've all become such integral parts of our community. It's hard to imagine it without you." "We're grateful for the acceptance and support we've found," Susan replied. "It's made all the difference." Meanwhile, Richard and James stood on the porch, the cool evening air refreshing after the warmth inside. "You must be proud of Michael," James remarked. "More than words can express," Richard said. "He's grown so much, found his passion." "And you've been instrumental in that," James pointed out. "Your support has given him the confidence to pursue his dreams." Richard considered this. "I suppose we've all grown," he acknowledged. "I never imagined I'd feel so connected, so at peace." James nodded thoughtfully. "Life has a way of surprising us when we open ourselves up to new possibilities." They stood in companionable silence, watching as the stars began to twinkle above. Back inside, Michael and Emma were deep in conversation with a group of peers who were eager to get involved. Plans were made for future collaborations, and contact information exchanged. The excitement was palpable. As the evening drew to a close, guests began to depart, each expressing appreciation for the meaningful gathering. "Thank you for hosting such a wonderful event," Harold said as he shook Richard's hand. "It was our pleasure," Richard replied sincerely. "We're glad you could be part of it." After the last guest had left, the family gathered in the living room, the remnants of the evening still evident in the scattered chairs and empty glasses. "Well, that was a success," Susan declared, sinking into the sofa. "Definitely," Michael agreed. "We got so much valuable input." Richard looked at his family, his heart swelling with affection. "I couldn't be prouder of us," he said softly. "We've come a long way." Susan rested her head on his shoulder. "Yes, we have." Michael yawned, the day's excitement catching up with him. "I think I'm going to head to bed," he announced. "Big day tomorrow. Emma and I have a lot to work on." "Good night, son," Richard said. "Sleep well." As Michael headed upstairs, Susan turned to Richard. "You know, I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" he asked. "Maybe it's time for us to consider putting down even deeper roots here," she suggested. "This place feels like home," Richard smiled. "I was thinking the same thing. Perhaps we could look into purchasing a property, maybe even starting a small business." "That would be wonderful," Susan agreed. "We have so much to offer, and this community has given us so much in return." Over the next few weeks, they explored various opportunities. Susan began offering cooking classes, combining her love of food with her desire to connect with others. Richard partnered with local artisans to open a cooperative store, showcasing handmade goods and promoting local talent. Their ventures were met with enthusiasm, further solidifying their place in the community. The cooperative became a hub for creativity and commerce, drawing visitors from neighboring towns. Susan's classes not only taught culinary skills, but also fostered friendships among participants. One afternoon, as Susan prepared for a class, James stopped by the store to see Richard. "Business seems to be booming," James observed, taking in the bustling activity. "It's been incredible," Richard admitted. "I never imagined we'd be so well received." "You've created something special here," James said. "It's a reflection of the openness and generosity you've embraced." "Thank you," Richard replied. "Coming from you, that means a lot." James looked around thoughtfully. "You know, I've been considering expanding my own ventures. Perhaps there's an opportunity for us to collaborate." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Tell me more." They delved into ideas, discussing possibilities that combined their strengths and passions. By the time James left, they had the framework for a joint project that promised to benefit the community even further. Meanwhile, Michael and Emma's conference presentation was fast approaching. They rehearsed diligently, incorporating the feedback they'd received. On the day of the event, the Thompsons accompanied them, eager to support and celebrate their achievements. The conference was held in a grand hall, filled with attendees from various regions, all eager to share and learn. Michael and Emma took the stage with confidence, delivering their presentation flawlessly. Their initiative was met with acclaim, and they were approached by several organizations interested in partnering with them. As they left the venue, their excitement was infectious. "We did it," Emma exclaimed, her eyes shining. "I'm so proud of you both," Susan said, embracing them. Richard nodded in agreement. "Your hard work and dedication have paid off." Back home, they celebrated with a small gathering of friends and supporters. The mood was jubilant, filled with laughter and heartfelt congratulations. In the weeks that followed, opportunities blossomed. Michael and Emma expanded their initiative, reaching more young people and making a tangible impact. Richard and James launched their collaborative project, a community center that offered resources, workshops, and a space for people to connect. The center became a beacon of unity, embodying the very ideals that had guided them on their journey. It offered educational programs, arts and crafts workshops, and support services, welcoming all with open arms. One evening, as the family walked home from the center, the sky ablaze with the colors of sunset, Michael spoke up. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if we hadn't moved here?" he asked. Susan smiled softly. I believe we were meant to be here, she said. Every step led us to this moment. Richard agreed. Our experiences have shaped us, but it's our choices that define us. I'm grateful we chose this path. Michael nodded thoughtfully. Me too. It's not just about what we've done, it's about who we've become. They continued walking, the quiet streets reflecting the tranquility they felt within. As time passed, the Thompsons and James continued to nurture the community they cherished. Their efforts had created ripples of positive change, inspiring others to take action and fostering a culture of inclusivity and compassion. One day, as they gathered for a picnic in the park, the same park where Michael had first met Emma, they reflected on their journey. We've built something truly special, James remarked, looking around at the smiling faces and lively interactions. And it's just the beginning, Emma added. There's so much more we can do. Susan raised her glass of lemonade. To the future, she toasted. May it be filled with joy, growth, and continued friendship. To the future, they echoed, clinking their glasses. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the warmth of companionship, they knew that they had not only overcome the shadows of the past but also laid the foundation for a brighter tomorrow. Their story was one of transformation, of barriers broken, hearts opened, and lives enriched by the simple yet profound act of embracing one another. It was a testament to the power of empathy, the impact of community, and the endless possibilities that unfold when we choose love over fear. And so, with hearts full and spirits lifted, they looked ahead with optimism and determination, ready to face whatever adventures awaited, secure in the knowledge that together they could achieve anything. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.